Hi everyone, and welcome back to part two of video on those winter Sundays. So in the first part we looked a lot at the final two lines, and we'll have a look at some of the details that stick out from the rest of the poem now, picking up on the comments and questions that you guys have sent during the week. I want to start, before we go sort of stanza by stanza, looking a little bit at some structural things to do with the poem. So a few people picked up on the idea that the poem is only in the past tense. Even when we get this sense of him thinking now, looking back, we don't move into the present. So obviously there's this sense of, one person put it really nicely, a melancholy memory. And also a couple of people picked up on the idea that perhaps the past tense emphasises the idea of someone who's only appreciated after the fact, and potentially only appreciated after he's gone. You know, a few people speculated, has the father actually now passed away, and is that's what's prompting this melancholy memory. Another thing structurally, probably mentioned before, I've got an antenna in terms of looking at poems where I'm saying, how many lines is this? And I'm looking for 14 lines, and that's what we've got here. So it's a sonnet-sized poem. It's not written as a sonnet. It doesn't rhyme like a sonnet rhymes, but as soon as a poem is 14 lines, it's, for me, a little connection to that tradition of sonnets and love poetry. So this is a kind of a love poem, and the fact it's such a different kind of love poem, and talks about a different kind of love from perhaps what is more typical of love poetry, perhaps that partly explains why it's not shaped like a sonnet, the lengths of the stanzas, and it doesn't rhyme like a sonnet, but still, I think that that's an extra little nod to the idea of love being really important in this poem. So it doesn't rhyme like a sonnet, it doesn't have a regular rhyme scheme, but sound is still really important in this poem, and a couple of people picked up on the idea of sound in the poem. And I think before the break, at the end of part one, I was talking about, you know, the meaning of the words in those last two lines, but actually, you know, poems aren't just a succinct explanation of something that happened or something that somebody felt, because, you know, you could always do that in a shorter way, but not necessarily a more effective or moving or memorable way. And so, as well as meaning, sound, I think poems are designed to be heard. So sound's really important, and just mood. And that's something about these last two lines. We sort of pulled apart some of the ideas around meaning and juxtaposition and oxymoron, which I think are really important. But, you know, I talked about how memorable I think those lines are. The Scottish poet Don Paterson once gave a definition of a poem as a tiny machine for remembering itself. So there's something about that, but there's also something about the way in which perhaps lines in a poem and sounds in a poem as well connect people to feelings or sensations or ideas which perhaps they can't quite pin down in words. So sound's really important, I think, as a part of that. It's a mood as well as a meaning. And in this poem, sound helps to create meaning a lot. And that's one of the things I want to look at, really, in the first stanza. So, said before, it doesn't have a regular rhyme scheme. It doesn't mean it doesn't rhyme. Okay? So we've got blue, black, and cracked. We've got banked and thanked. So we do have these patterns and rhyming patterns of sound. In particular here, we've got these K sounds throughout this first stanza there as well, and I think those sort of speak to that idea of the hard work that this person is doing, the harshness of the father's life with that harsh repeated K sound. We've also got banked. A banked fire is a very large fire, and you've got then the contrast between that and the fact no one ever thanked him is pointed out by that repeated sound. And with no one ever thanked him, a couple of people picked up on the point that this is a really short sentence in a poem whose sentences are long and meandering. So it really drives home that point and maybe emphasises this unspoken but very kind of present in the air almost guilt that the speaker is feeling. So no one ever thanked him. Questions. One student said, why is he up early? Well, I guess to make the fire, and because it's important to him to create this comfortable life if he possibly can for the son. There's also perhaps this idea of the family's poverty, the fact that he has to make this fire by hand, and maybe that's something that was more usual at that time in history, but it's different. He doesn't have those sort of labour-saving devices and luxuries that we might have now. One person picked up on the idea of Sundays too. My father got up early, so without telling us, we have this implication. He gets up every other day early as well. This guy never gets a rest, even on what is traditionally the day of rest, Sunday. One person said, why is he written about winter Sundays? And I guess winter has all these connotations, doesn't it, of difficulty and harshness and darkness, which link to ideas are in the poem, and this harsh and austere view of love and life. And Sundays, I think it's exactly that Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest. As soon as you start a poem with Sundays, it's introducing one set of expectations, which is quite different from what we actually get, because he's working hard and he's up early. There's no rest for this particular father. A few other people picked out details in this stanza. Blue-black was one that a couple of people talked about. What's the idea of prophetic fallacy in blue-black cold, and blue with its connotations of sadness, feeling blue, and black with its connotations of darkness and a lack of hope. And one particular student said, well, already we've got this real sense of sympathy for the father, that he exists in this blue-black cold, and that's before we get onto his cracked hands and so on. But these details, like the cracked hands, like the fact that he's been labouring all week, show, another student said, how hard he works, which links into that important idea we've already mentioned of sacrifices he makes for his son. Just one more thing on blue-black. I just think it's an interesting thing sometimes that poetry can do, or all kinds of writing can do, language can do. All the words pretty much in this stanza are simple words, vast majority of them one-syllable words, and blue-black is simple as well, and in another way not simple, because you've got these two very everyday words, two of the first words probably that toddlers learn when they're learning the language, and yet put them together and it's kind of a new word. The other thing about that word, which another student picked up on, is it links to a phrase, black and blue. If you're black and blue, you've been beaten or you've been injured. And this student made a really astute point about a semantic field of injury or pain. So we've got blue-black, but then we've also got cracked. And as we move through splintering, breaking, that's before we even talk about these sort of chronic angers here. And chronic, of course, is a medical word, so that fits into that field of injury as well. So there's some unknown injury or pain going on here, maybe in the background. So again, that idea of an atmosphere, we're not told, but what is this hidden hurt that seems to be this sort of extra character in the room, the Banquo's ghost, if you like, of this poem. A few people picked up on this line, the chronic angers of that house. The house isn't happy. It's personification here, which is quite striking. And one person said, and I agree, notwithstanding what we've just said about that field of pain and injury, it sticks out from the rest of the poem, because actually the other emotions in the poem are to do with love and service. They might be difficult and sacrificial love and service, but they're positive, warm, paternal feelings. And here we have anger. And this student correctly pointed out it sticks out from the rest of the poem and it's never explained. Well, I found that really interesting, partly because there seems to be a pattern here of things that are never explained. We talked about this unexplained sense of hurt, or even why is he up early? Well, we can speculate as to why, but I'm interested in the contrast in the poem between specific details like the cracks on his hands and then these questions about their wider life, this kind of terrain of meaning, as I put it before, that's been hinted at but not explained, and gives you the sense that here is this quite tiny poem with quite a specific point to make, but it opens up this vast imaginative terrain that keeps us thinking, perhaps, even if it's on a subconscious level, keeps our brain turning over these ideas long after we've finished a poem. One person about this line asked, is the father abusive in some way? Well, no evidence of that, and certainly the father seems to be acting out of love. That's what the end of the poem suggests for the child. But then again, is there a sense of making up for something? I don't know. We don't know that for sure, and depending on your own life experience or other things you've read and all different connections you might make in your mind, obviously you might interpret that line in different ways. Let's move on. The last stanza. Well, we've talked about the ending quite a bit. A few other things though about this. Speaking indifferently to him. Again, quite plain, not poetic, that line. If you took it out of context, you'd think it was prose rather than poetry. But there's a lot in there. Actually there's a contrast with anger. It's not strong emotion here, indifference. Almost the father being ignored, which is almost sadder than a more violent rejection. Driven out the cold, a metaphor there, and actually driving out the cold almost has something magical about it. In a war against the cold, and he's winning that, and perhaps there's something about that makes all the more poignant the kind of indifference of the son and the lack of understanding of the son. Okay, so I think a really interesting poem that works on lots and lots of different levels and has some really kind of memorable phrases in it. So here's again that list of ideas that you picked out, lots of you, and a really sort of good summary. And what I want to do, just to sort of finish off, is to suggest you might do one of two things. Either pick one of these or something similar, an idea of your own, and write a paragraph answering the question. If you want to, by all means write 3 paragraphs, a whole answer to the question. But I'm suggesting write a paragraph answering the question, which you can send to me, and here's a reminder of the structure to use. Or think back to BAMP and make a list of similarities and differences between those 2 poems. Hopefully after watching and thinking about the 2 videos you've got time to do one of those 2 things. And once you've done one of those 2 things, then you'll come to the end of the last lesson of this half term. And just want to say, as much as I have missed interacting with you all in the classroom, I have really enjoyed interacting with you remotely over the last few weeks. So thank you for making that the case with your messages and your points and your questions and the work that you've sent me. Well, maybe we'll see each other in a few weeks in class. Keep your eyes peeled for more information from Mrs. Tasker regarding plans around that. And in the meantime, I hope you have a good rest and enjoy half term as much as you can while staying safe and following the rules. If there's anyone who's feeling behind or like you're struggling with the work or you're worried about anything, please get in touch and I will reply and do everything that I can to help you out. And apart from that, until we meet again, have a good half term and I'll see you soon.